Hi everyone, Souha here, your way of life dog training, canine rearing and relationship coach. Wishing all of you a wonderful start to the new school year. You know, when we celebrate the start of a new academic year, we're usually looking forward to new learning ahead. But what I'm here to share with you is that in 20 plus years of living and working with dogs, 15 plus years of being a student of dog training, and 5 plus years of being in the dog business, what I and our clients have come to realize is that yes, there's a lot to learn, but there's also equally a lot to unlearn. Mark Twain once said, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you think you know for sure that just ain't so." And in this video, I'm going to share with you 5 deadly dog training ideas that I think it's time we all let go of. Stay tuned. All right, so idea number 1 is that breed predicts behavior. And that is true. But does breed predict misbehavior? You know, this is such a common explanation, right? You might have heard the different questions that we ask. Are they doing this because they're a German Shepherd? Is this behavior because they're an Australian Shepherd? Is this behavior because they're a Poodle? You know, our very first clients were owners of a Corgi. That Corgi used to nip at their heels. And they thought for the longest time, up until they started working with us, that that behavior was natural and related to the breed. And then I corrected them gently and I said, you know, it's normal for a Corgi to nip at the heels of sheep and cows, but it's another story and it's another issue altogether when that Corgi's nipping at your heels, okay? So this is such a common explanation in the dog training culture and in the dog training world, that it's because of the breed that a dog is doing something or other. And I'm here to tell you that it's true that breed is very powerful. It is true that genetics are very powerful. And that's why whenever I'm dealing with a client whose dog is a hybrid or a mixed breed and we're not sure about their background and so on, I will often recommend that they get genetic testing done because it could be helpful. And indeed, members of breed groups share many characteristics. Herding dogs behave in similar ways, toy dogs behave in similar ways, gun dogs behave in similar ways, and so on. But breed is not everything. Breed is nature. The other end of the equation is nurture. In other words, how you raise that dog. And there are huge variations within a single breed. So I have several German Shepherds. There's one right here, one here, one here, and I'm telling you, they could not be more different from each other. So there are huge variations within the breed. Every dog has their own unique personality, but there's also the nurturing and the rearing and handling and management of that breed, or nurture. Nurture is just as powerful, if not more powerful than breed. And so anytime you're dealing with a dog's behavior, it is a function of that dog's breed, of course, but it is also a function of that dog's unique temperament and personality and how that dog is raised and nurtured. Right? I think so. The second idea is that dogs are misbehaving today or struggling with behavior issues today because of some trauma that happened in the past. Now, let me start by saying that one of the major drivers of my experience was volunteering in the shelter system and with a variety of rescues. And I'm no stranger to the trauma that can be in the dogs that are brought into the shelter or rescue system. I've seen all of it. Emaciated dogs, abandoned dogs, embedded collars, neglected dogs, abused dogs, you name it. There's no doubt that trauma has an effect on dogs. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt that they are probably not going to turn out to be the dogs that they could have turned out to be without that trauma. But what I also see all too often is that trauma in the past is an excuse for poor behavior and issues in the present, even if the trauma occurred many, many years ago. I've heard people say it to me. He was attacked by a dog. He was a rescue. He was in the shelter for however long. He got lost. You know, all these stories that take us back to the past and rid us of the power that we have in the present. So I'm here to tell you that trauma is powerful, but what is also very powerful is our way of life, and that the same neural networks that make us susceptible to being traumatized are the same neural networks that can help us survive and thrive in the wake of trauma. So not only is it our obligation to help our dogs heal, but dogs also want to heal. Unlike some of us human beings who display our trauma like a calling card sometimes, dogs want to recover. And not only that, they look up to the person that helps them do that. They adore and cherish the human who says, you know, let bygones be bygones, and let's enjoy our present and future together and heal that past trauma through our way of life. Idea number 3 is the idea that socialization is the answer to all of our problems. Socialization and added exposure is a tool that will help us resolve behavior issues. Now, that's not always incorrect, but more often than not, it is incorrect. What do we mean by socialization? Preparing dogs and puppies in particular for success in life and society. It's education, it's experience, it's exposure. And certainly there is something to be said for socializing puppies during that critical socialization period. But what ends up happening is that when people are struggling with behavior issues, in particular with dogs whose past they do not know, is that they assume that that dog might have not been properly socialized. And so what do we end up doing? If the dog came from a rescue, we go ahead and we slam that dog with socialization exposures and experiences. Same with a new puppy. Reactive dog needs more exposure. Traumatized dog must need more exposure. Fearful dog must need more socialization and exposure. And I'm here to tell you that in our approach, in the way of life method approach, we have a very particular understanding of what socialization is. We understand it as exposure to the world, of course, but we also follow a gradual process of exposure that begins with something that we call primordial socialization. What does that mean? Primordial socialization means that the dogs need to be bonded to us and comfortable with us and in good relationships with us before we take them out into the world, okay? And then once we have that primordial socialization, then we can start expanding their world towards what we call spatial socialization and distal socialization and so on, as I describe in the method. But the bottom line is that you need to start from a place where you have that one-on-one relationship with your dog. That is the most important element of socialization and underlines every other effort at socializing a dog, regardless of breed, age, or background. So socialization is helpful, it's important, but it's also important that we understand what it is. And it's also even more important that we understand that it has to begin with a primordial relationship, a primordial socialization between us and our dogs that allows us to expose that dog into the world successfully when the time is right. Idea number 4 is that having our dogs participate in sport will help cure issues of fear, lack of confidence, reactivity, and so on. Now, let me start off by saying that I absolutely love participating in sport with our dogs. There's hardly a sport that I haven't tried in the 20 plus years that I've shared my life with dogs. Sport builds up dogs, harnesses their strengths, gives a home to their natural drives and inherited tendencies and motivations. And we're very lucky to live in an age where there are so many different dog sports that are available, including barn hunt, agility, scent detection, protection, you name it. There's a sport for just about every breed out there, and every dog out there can partake in a variety of sports. So let me say this. Participation in sport is a wonderful thing, and I don't want to discourage you from it. But participation in sport alone will not cure our behavior issues. In fact, what can happen, is the opposite, is that it can create tension between dog and handler because sport puts dogs in a position of pressure, in a position of having to perform, in a position of having to obey. And unless there is a foundation of relationship between handler and dog to make that happen, there could be a lot of conflict and tension and antagonism happening between handler and dog in these sporting venues. Sport can also make dogs stronger and tougher, which is a good thing. We want our dogs strong. But unless, again, there's that foundation of relationship between handler and dog, that strength could be displayed against the handler and not in favor of their relationship, but in the detriment of the relationship between handler and dog. You know, in the 20 plus years, like I said, of participation in dog sport, and I have seen reactive dogs in dog sport. I have seen fearful dogs in dog sport. I have seen handlers and dogs argue in these sporting and trialing arenas. So sporting is important. It's something that I recommend all of our clients once they're in a certain place in their relationship to do, but it's not necessarily alone the answer to our behavior issues. Right, Mira? The fifth and final idea is that behavior modification is what's going to change behavior. The world of dog training is obsessed with behavior, and yet behavior is only a surface manifestation of a deeper problem. I consider behavior to be a symptom rather than the problem itself. Okay, and so trying to deal with issues of fear, reactivity, resource guarding, aggression, the way we try to go about it is by modifying the dog's behavior without looking at the root cause. And so we use sophisticated and complex reinforcement protocols, counter conditioning, classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and whatever else to try to change what is in fact an underlying attitude. So don't get me wrong, training is essential. And reinforcement is essential to teach dogs skills. We were talking about sport right now, so in a sporting arena, whether you're doing scent detection or agility or obedience, of course you're teaching the dog skills. And the best way to teach dogs skills is through reinforcement, preferably positive, okay? But if we're trying to get dogs to be confident in the world, we're trying to get dogs to be happy, outgoing, steady, and stable, those are attitudes that you're only going to go so far trying to instill these attitudes through training that is meant for surface behavior. If you're trying to cultivate in your dogs what we value in the way of life methods, soundness, strength, and spiritedness, those are attitudes, those are character traits, personality traits almost, that cannot really be trained into the dog, but can only be instilled in your way of life. So training produces skills and behaviors. Way of life or rearing produces character traits that are simply incompatible with some of the behaviors that we're dealing with this way. A dog raised for soundness, strength, and spiritedness cannot possibly manifest the issues that so many dogs struggle with, including reactivity, fear, and so on. So, thank you. So to recap, the 5 ideas that we want to unlearn in this new school year is 1, breed predicts behavior and predicts behavior alone. That is not the case. Breed is nature and your way of life is nurture. Idea number 2 is that trauma in the past dictates behavior in the present, and trauma is powerful, but it's not the only factor, and not only that, way of life helps heal past trauma. Idea number 3 is that socialization is the answer to all our behavior issues. And socialization is important and powerful, but there needs to be the prerequisite of relationship foundations for successful socialization. Idea number 4 is that sport will help dogs become more confident and get over behavior issues. And that's not to take anything away from sport, but again, sport is only one element in a way of life. And then idea number 5 is that behavior modification, by aiming to change behavior, will help us deal with behavior issues. And what I'm arguing is that behavior issues are as a result, of attitudes, and these attitudes can only be instilled in the way of life as opposed to through behavior modification and conditioning. What do all of these excuses have in common? All of these ideas have in common the notion that they overlook way of life. And yet, way of life is so very powerful. It's powerful beyond measure. How a dog is handled, how a dog is managed, how a dog is raised, how a dog is dealt with in their day-to-day life creates a circumstance, a set of conditions, a context for a dog that will ultimately drive their attitude and therefore the visible behavior that may or may not be good behavior. So, if anything that I said struck a chord with you, and you can tell that I'm onto something here, and that there's an aspect to dogs' behavior that we've been overlooking all of this time, which is their way of life that we have control over, then please do not hesitate to reach out to us. I know that we can help you regardless of where you are. We help people virtually as well as in person. We have private as well as group classes, and we have dealt with any and all behavior issues in dogs of all breeds, backgrounds, ages, and we are here to assist you and your family do just the same.